The Gospel of Mark.
The measure of a man. Mark 4:24. Hello. Jesus recently finished teaching a parable. It's the parable about the lamp and covering it up with a basket. Jesus, he's still talking with his disciples, and he's telling them the same thing that he told them at the end of his other parable, the sower, the man who was throwing out the seeds. And he said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Mark 4:9. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. Mark 4:23. Jesus, he was saying the same thing after the first parable of the sower that he talked about, and then he said it again after the parable of the lambs. The same thing Jesus was saying twice. So we know it's important. One reason Jesus is emphasizing that, he wants us to know that we as Christians need to understand the deep spiritual meaning of his parable. Also, the second meaning. Now we've moved from the first one to the second one. What is that? Well, let's look at the verse. And he said to them, "Pay attention to what you hear. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and still more will be added to you." Mark 4:24. Jesus said, "Pay attention." Jesus said, "Pay attention and listen to what that he is teaching." And what is that? It's the gospel. How do we understand the gospel? Well, we need to first pay attention and learn, and then understand the gospel's meaning. Then Jesus said, whatever amount of knowledge that we have to measure the gospel, and secondly, our love for the gospel, God will measure us the same way. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and still more will be added to you. Mark 4:24b. Well, what does Jesus mean about measuring? Well, Jesus means that what we do going forward in our Christian life, our spiritual thoughts, our love for God and the gospel, how important it is to us. Is it important to you and me? If it is, then we will have more full of a measure, like a glass of water. Question: Christians all over, do they measure the same way in their Christian life? No. Perhaps one Christian in their life, they have a very close relationship with God, and they do things, so many things to show their love to others, to show Christ. And maybe another Christian does not show so much in their life. Their heart maybe not is overflowing. Jesus said that God will measure us in the same way that we measure ourselves. Let's look. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and still more will be added to you. Mark 4:24b. If we have a passion, a desire to spread the gospel through whatever way that we can, and also our life overflowing with Christ in us, we can spread the gospel. How do we start to do that? Well, we're involved in ministry at the church, out in the community, doing whatever we can to support someone. From that perspective, God will measure us. If we do not have that passion in our faith, and then God will measure us in that small way. In heaven, God will reward us more if our life on earth is overflowing through our faith in Him. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and still more will be added to you. Mark 4:24c. When we are involved in ministry, in our faith in God, loving others, That means we are involving Jesus in every part of our Christian life. God will reward us. What is this reward? Well, is it God's judgment? I'm going to explain about that in the next devotion. The more involved that we are in obeying God's will, then the more that will be added to us. What is God's will? To love Him fully, to love others fully, and to be involved in spreading the gospel. That's our goal. Let's look at this verse again. And he said to them, pay attention to what you hear. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and still more will be added to you. Mark 4:24. As Christians, we need to go ahead and give our everything to the Lord. Coram Deo.
To live coram Deo is to live one's entire life in the presence of God, under the authority of God, to the glory of God.
Everyday Breadcrumbs, Devotional Studies for the Deaf by Brad and Tammy Schaaf, taught in American Sign Language by Brad and voiceover by his wife Tammy. All verses from English Standard Version. BradDaleSchaaf@gmail.com.